Pistons fired Monty Williams after just one season. The NBA draft is in 1 week, and so much more on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano. Joining me this week is Aaron Johnson. Aaron, we are speaking on the day before your birthday, but those listening, it is going to be your actual birthday. So let me be maybe the first or maybe the second to say happy birthday.
Thank you, brother.
My good friend. And what a day. What a day. Monty Williams fired. You're going to be at the press conference with Trajan Langdon. You get to listen and maybe ask a question and hear some insight onto the biggest news. How does that feel? That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a busy day tomorrow. Obviously going to get out on the links before that and get an 18 in. It's important to golf as much as you can. So to all the listeners out there, make sure you're golfing, make sure you're getting those swings in. But yeah, after that, going to hear from Tom Gores and Trajan Langdon on the current state of the Detroit Pistons, on the coaching search that is ongoing. And I'm sure there might be a few questions about the NBA draft that is, less than a week away. So a lot for them to cover, a lot for us to cover today. And I'm excited to get into all of it.
I'm excited to get into it as well. We've been prepping for this Monty Williams firing show for a little while. So we're going to get right into it as soon as we thank our sponsor for this week, and that is BetOnline. And BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing, every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. And when the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on the game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today, get in on the action. Make sure that you use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use BetOnline. BetOnline, the game starts here. And this podcast really starts here because we're going to, actually, pre-show plugs. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit out of practice. It's been a few weeks. Pre-show plugs, please subscribe to our Substack, Palace of Pistons. You can find it at palacepistons.com. You're missing out on the weekly drive every Monday, written by yours truly. You're missing out on at least one Wednesday column written by Aaron, and potentially sometimes somebody else if he's really busy. And then, of course, you're missing the podcast getting sent right to your email inbox as soon as it drops on Fridays. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go into the description if you're watching on YouTube. You can find it on social media as well. You can follow us on Twitter, and it will be there. Please subscribe to us on Substack so you get all that awesome information directly to your inbox every morning. So that's our plea. We've got a good cadence going: Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sometimes we have to do an emergency pod when something drops, but we're in a groove with a Substack.
That's my birthday wish. My birthday wish, what I want from everyone for my birthday, is for you to subscribe to palaceofpistons.com. That would mean the world to me on my birthday today. So please go do that. Help your brothers out.
That's a great gift idea. That's a great gift. And you know what? Super cost effective. I mean, super cost effective. Yes, please subscribe to our Substack, Palace of Pistons, or you can go to palacepistons.com and it will be the first thing that pops up, so that you can get content like this directly to your inbox. When we get to talk about Monty Williams being fired, and that is exactly what happened. Wednesday morning, the Pistons fired Monty Williams as the team's head coach. He just had one season with the organization. It was the worst season in the organization's history, so he really made his mark. He still due $67.5 million for the remaining 5 years of his, at the time, record-setting deal. Detroit was 14-68 under Monty Williams, a 28-game losing streak. They were the worst team in the NBA. They regressed in almost every major metric despite being healthy with Cade Cunningham. The final decision was made by ownership, by Tom Gores, after Williams had met with the new president of basketball operations, Trajan Langdon, several times. Reportedly, Monty was, quote unquote, blindsided by the firing. But if you listen to this podcast, you should not be blindsided, because we have been sort of talking this slowly out of the station for weeks now that this was going to happen. There was just no way that you could keep Monty Williams after the season that he put together.
There was just no world where he was coming back. And like you said, if you've been listening to the show, you've heard us essentially tell you that for at least the past month. You're living under a rock if you thought Monty was coming back. The way that he performed, the relationships that he did not cultivate during his time are very, very important reasons as to why he's no longer here. Don't look at just the fact that he was due still another near $70 million. Look at the fact that he had pretty much alienated himself from everyone in this organization. He was an abject disaster. There's unfortunately no other way to put it. A hire that at the time, everyone, ourselves included, thought was a home run hire, just quite frankly wasn't. It was a swing and a miss. From the talk right at the introductory press conference to, saying that he took the job because the Pistons came back and offered him so much more money than he could have ever imagined. From the talks about him not liking analytics, not wanting to work with analytics, not wanting to use analytics in coaching, from the fact that he did not cultivate a good relationship with Cade Cunningham, with what he did between Jaden Ivey and Killian Hayes, and starting Killian Hayes over Jaden Ivey after Ivey had such a impressive and promising rookie season. The list goes on and on with where Monty Williams failed during just 1 year with the Detroit Pistons. So, yes, he needed to go. Let's give credit to Tom Gores where credit is due. I don't know how many owners would say, I'm going to take this public embarrassment. I'm going to eat $70 million, and I'm going to get rid of this guy out of this franchise. Because, look, for all of the things that are said about Tom Gores, and to be fair, a lot of the things that are said are fair to be said, this was something that I didn't know if he'd actually do. As time went on, he did it, and it was the absolute right decision. He had to bite the bullet. He had to accept the failure. He had to bite the bullet with the money, and he did, and the Pistons are in a better position because of it. They're going into a new season with a new president of basketball operations, hopefully having the power to make true, meaningful basketball decisions, and they're coming in with a new coach that, quite frankly, just could not possibly be worse than Monty Williams.
Yeah, for a lot of the reasons that we talked about throughout the season, from starting Isaiah Livers from a feeling he had one random night to, some of the quotes that he put out there.
It wasn't analytics. It wasn't analytics that was calling.
It wasn't analytics. Analytics would probably tell you to not start Isaiah Livers. I'm just saying. No offense to Isaiah Livers. I had somebody tell me who covers a team say that Monty Williams was checked out before Adrian Griffin was fired. And Adrian Griffin was another just disaster as a coach, and they cut bait pretty darn fast. So Monty's been sort of on the outs for quite a while, and he's going to get his money. This is a lesson to anybody at any scale of business that you're working at, that no matter how much money you offer, if you keep throwing money at someone and they keep saying no, the response is not to throw more money at them until they can't say no, because you might get output like this, which is a guy who, even from the first day on his introductory press conference, was like, it's hard to say no. I think he said it's an honor for somebody to put up that much money because they really want you. That's the mindset of somebody that is not in it to win a basketball game or put forward their best effort. That is somebody who just banked $70 million no matter what. And there were a lot of bullets bit. Tom Gores bit the bullet on the guy that he wanted not working out. He bit the bullet on the money. Kudos to him for, looking at the situation. probably agreeing with what Langdon had to say, and the best option was just to move forward. But now that puts the Pistons into the uncomfortable situation of they are one of two teams left in the league now without a head coach. Candidates include, now there's a plethora of people out there, with the Lakers now most recently hiring JJ Redick to be their head coach. We can take him off the board. James Borrego, I think, had 5-1 odds according to Bet Online to be the next head coach. Everything I'm hearing is that the Cavaliers are going to be hiring him in the next 24 to 48 hours. Sean Sweeney, an assistant with the Dallas Mavericks, who Jason Kidd openly said is going to be another head coach. Derek Lively credited Sweeney with being a huge force for him to be a better offensive center. Micah Nori, who took over for Chris Finch very briefly after he tore his Achilles or tore his ACL, or what did he tear? He tore something.
Yeah, I think it was his Achilles.
I think it was his Achilles as well. Will Weaver, Chris Quinn, Sam Cassell, Kenny Atkinson, a lot of these names that have been percolating in the NBA coaching sphere for a while. ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski also added that he'd be shocked if the Pistons had a new head coach before the draft, which is next week, obviously. So, I've got some thoughts on some of those names, but I want to hear your thoughts on the names that I had listed for head coach. We talked about this last year. We kind of wanted a guy who could be a developmental coach, like a Chris Quinn. Sam Cassell coming off a championship with the Celtics. Sean Sweeney, another developmental guy. Chris Quinn, people have called him like a young Eric Spoelstra, which is certainly enticing. But what are your thoughts on some of those guys that have been rumored as a potential suitor for the Pistons job?
Yeah, look, I think all of these names have merit, right? I think, James Borrego is probably the favorite in terms of who people would want. Although if he's going to Cleveland, that takes another name off the list. JJ Redick was certainly a pipe dream. And I think, the deal doesn't happen right when Adrian Wojnarowski reports it. The deal has likely been finalized for at least 24 to 48 hours. And if you're inside NBA circles, you might know of some of these things that are going down before the general public does. So that might have played a factor in when Monty Williams was finally decided to having been let go from his position with the Pistons. I like pretty much all of these names on this list from what we can know, right? Will Weaver seems like an absolute up-and-comer. We've been saying for years, Chris Quinn's due for an NBA coaching gig. Sean Sweeney and Micah Nori were both former assistants under Dwayne Casey, or it was Nori with Stan Van Gundy. But both of them were with the Detroit Pistons at one point in time, and now are in the limelight as some of the top assistants in the NBA. Sam Cassell, another guy, a top assistant, has paid his dues, going from a player to working his way up through a coaching staff. And then Kenny Atkinson, who has tenure in the league, has been a head coach, was an assistant coach before being a head coach, has been an assistant coach since being a head coach. Like, all of these guys have merit. All of these guys have tenure. And I don't think I can look at this group and say, I definitely don't want X, Y, or Z. Whereas last year when we were looking at the coaching candidate list for Detroit, and it was Kevin Ollie and these other names that were pretty much just linked to Troy Weaver, it was like, I don't know how much I like all of these names. So from what we know on the outside, all of these names seem like perfectly qualified candidates. I unfortunately can't bring you this super hard take on like really going to bat for Will Weaver or really going to bat against Sam Cassell, because like they all have a resume to look at and say it's respectable what you've done, how long you've been in each position, the ladder that you've climbed. All of them have a resume that says there's a world where they're an NBA coach. And I like the idea of any of these guys taking over the Pistons.
Yes, any of these guys would be fine. Will Weaver worked with Kenny Atkinson in Brooklyn. And to answer your question, Micah Nori was here from 2018 to 2021. So he was here during the Dwayne Casey years. All of these guys would be fine coaching options. Sean Sweeney, developmental. Micah Nori, another developmental guy working under Chris Finch with the Minnesota Timberwolves, who, by the way, went to the Western Conference Finals. Sweeney, the Western Conference champion, Dallas Mavericks. Will Weaver works with the Brooklyn Nets right now. I think he was hired last year. Chris Quinn, again. Mini Eric Spoelstra sounds good to me. I mean, that'll work. And then Sam Cassell, another guy who seems like he's due for an opportunity as well. And Kenny Atkinson, came through the Brooklyn Nets meat grinder of trying to get that team out of the doghouse and building that up. Some say he was fired unceremoniously to make way for, I believe, Steve Nash. And that, may have been the wrong move, but who is to say? So any of these guys would be fine with me. I hope that the Pistons do take their time. They don't need a coach before the draft. The front office is going to be able to make the decision on what they need based on the roster construction. They don't need a head coach's input. Maybe if they start interviewing now, they can ask for coach input or thoughts or, as it pertains to play style. But like I said, any of these guys would be totally fine with me. Gun to your head, though, if you had to pick a name off this list, who are the Pistons going to hire?
Oh, boy. I think, I'd like to say James Borrego, but if he's going to Cleveland, you can't say it. I will say that, out of these names, we know a couple of them do have connections to Trajan Langdon, specifically James Borrego, and then Will Weaver. And if you look at how the Pistons have operated in the short few weeks under Langdon, a lot of what they have done is brought in Langdon's guys. They brought in Michael Blackstone. They just brought in Fred Vincent for an assistant on the staff, and he's going to be there despite Monty Williams now being let go, despite him joining the staff when technically Williams was still the head coach. So they're bringing in guys that are connected to Langdon. So I would say if Borrego doesn't go to Cleveland, maybe that is the guy Detroit lands on because of the connections, because of the relationship. And he was being talked about, before Trajan Langdon was named the Pistons president of basketball operations. But let's say Borrego isn't the guy. I will say Will Weaver. I'll go out on a limb and say Langdon's going to continue in the order that he's operated in since taking over, and really bringing in the guys that he knows, bringing in the guys that he has relationships with. And this would be a first-time NBA head coach, a younger head coach that's very much lauded for being an up-and-comer in the NBA coaching circle. So I'll go out on a limb and I'll say if it's not James Borrego, then it'll be Will Weaver. And that's not sourced. That's just me speculating.
I'm going to go with Sean Sweeney, mostly due to his relationship with Dwayne Casey, who's still in the front office. I think that Chris Quinn is a very close second just because he interviewed last year as well. So he has a little bit of history with interviewing with the Pistons. But, I mean, you could make a case for any of these guys to get the opportunity to be the head coach. So just because – and there's other guys that are not on this list, like J.B. Bickerstaff, who I have seen plenty of. And I think he'd be a fine option for a rebuilding team. That's what he was with Cleveland as the assistant to John Beilein. So I wouldn't be upset if they looked at JB. I think he's good for young players. But it's going to be a little while before they pick a head coach. I think they're going to give it some time to sift through all of their options. So it's going to be something worth monitoring. But it's not going to happen before the draft. That seems to be sort of the unwritten aspect of all this. But that doesn't mean the draft is going to slow down. The draft is still next week. And this is the last podcast before the NBA draft. So now it's sort of time to talk about it's time to talk about who the Pistons could be taking. There's some guys they've been linked to. There's some guys they haven't really been linked to as heavily. Zachary Rizachet, Cody Williams, Rob Dillingham, Matas Buzelis. Dalton Connect seems like he's not going to be a guy, despite our love for him as a vet. Donovan Clingan and Stephon Castle. Doesn't really seem like Clingan or Castle are on the radar as well. But it's time to make our predictions for the draft, and it's super fluid. But who do you think the Pistons are going to be taking at 5?
I will say it's very interesting to see the rise that Cody Williams has seen in the past week or so, and what's being reported at NBA circles is that it wouldn't be a surprise if he ends up going in the top 5. He's been specifically linked to Detroit, and it seems like there's legitimate traction there. I was very, very big on Cody Williams early in the season at Colorado during the NCAA season. He was playing, I would say, good basketball, not great. He then suffered an injury, and when he came back, it was the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament. And he wasn't quite the same player. He was coming off the bench and just wasn't having the same impact. Didn't seem as comfortable. He was still kind of a reach at, as a top 3, top 5 pick back before the Pistons were, not picking one. But we're still, in the undecided lottery. I'd say I'm a little less comfortable taking Williams now than I would have been had you come to me in, February. I think if I had to make the pick for Detroit, thinking in Detroit's way, that it'll end up being Matas Buzelis. Yes, there are connections there. With Arn Tellem, with Michael Tellem, Arn Tellem's son being his agent. Buzelis has been in for a workout, has gotten good reviews. He has seemingly risen up polls in recent NBA draft evaluations. So I could very much see him being the pick for Detroit if he's not drafted at 4. But that's probably who the Pistons internally would have linked as the favorite for the pick at 5. Assuming, I guess, that Zachary Richeche is off the board. And if Richeche is not off the board at 5, I don't know how you pass him up. It's weird because in some mock drafts, he's going 1. In other mock drafts, he's slid to 7. And that's just how this draft is viewed. All of these prospects could go anywhere, seemingly. I think the only guy that seems like a lock to go in the top 3 is Alex Sarr for whatever reason. But everyone else is just kind of bouncing around. Like Reed Shepherd, is he going to be on the board at 5? Is he going to be picked at 3 to Houston? So, there's even talk about him going 1 to Atlanta. That's just how this draft is. But, looking at Detroit's line of thinking, look at how Detroit's operated, I think that the connections being drawn to Buzelis are strong, and it would not surprise me if he's the pick on Wednesday night.
Yeah, this is all caveats on top of caveats. Sarr is the only guy who's sort of linked to go at least 1 or 2. Riza Shea dropped to 4 in a mock I saw to the San Antonio Spurs. Donovan Clingan was 1 in a mock draft. I believe that was from The Athletic. So, like I said, very fluid situation. If you had to rank those guys, though, it's probably Riza Shea 1, Buzelis 2, Cody Williams and Rob Dillingham fighting. I'd probably rather have Cody Williams 3 and then Dillingham 4 just from a size perspective and based on the current roster construction. I still like Dalton Connect. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. I still like Donovan Clingan. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen. But super dependent on what the teams in front of Detroit do. So you're going with Buzelis as your pick.
Yeah, and look, I would very much like Buzelis, and if he had this talent and he had this skill, he'd probably be the number 1 pick by a pretty wide margin. But if he can become a legitimate shooter, there is a lot that he does well. I don't necessarily trust him, putting the ball on the floor and trying to get to the rim against a defender. He's not very tough or skilled with the ball in his hands. And the shooting, the numbers are much more, theoretical from playing in high school. Whereas in the G League, he was not a good 3-point shooter. There's that whole, he has a shooting touch, but you can have a shooting touch, but if the numbers don't show it, if the ball doesn't go in the hoop, and that's all just in theory. So he has a lot of skills, the size, the athleticism. There could be a good NBA player in there, but The concerns that I have for him having the ball in his hands and trying to do things with the ball and the outside shooting are just legitimate concerns that I have. There are certainly things that he's going to do well. And if he can become a legitimate floor spacer, then he probably becomes one of the best prospects in this class. And maybe that's, Detroit's line of thinking is let's really invest in the shooting development side. Fred Vinson, the assistant coach that they just brought in, is so widely regarded for his three-point shooting, his outside shooting development, working on form, working on hand placement. Maybe that's where Detroit's thinking is. We know we have a guy coming in that has a track record of helping young guys develop, fix their jump shot, fix the mechanics, and become reliable three-point shooters. He's done it with Herbert Jones in New Orleans. He's done it with a slew of other guys over there. Jose Alvarado made significant progressions in his three-point shooting percentages. The list goes on and on over there. But that could be their line of thinking because they have a lot of guys on this roster that they really like them to be good three-point shooters and they kind of need them to be good three-point shooters, but they're not yet. And that's kind of what they would be drafting again if they did take Buzelis. So maybe that's their line of thinking. Buzelis does have a lot of other really good qualities. And if you can get him to become a good three-point shooter or a serviceable three-point shooter, that makes him a much, much better player.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on Fred really and how they hired him independent of Monty Williams's future. They hired him before. Obviously, they fired him. This is very clearly a Trajan Langdon hire, not a Monty Williams hire.
Well, it was originally tried to be spun as a Monty Williams hire, which I don't know who believed that, but it was not. Yes, they had a relationship, but so did Vincent and Langdon. I didn't get that at all.
I didn't get that either. And there were some people on the beat who were pretty certain that meant that Monty was staying, which I don't think any of us had felt that way, but it was definitely very odd to go in that order. But I think that goes to show the sort of the vision that Langdon has. It goes beyond Monty Williams, clearly, and getting a guy like Fred Vinson, who's very well regarded. I saw a lot of people in the New Orleans Pelicans inner circles disappointed that they lost him to the Pistons. If they regard it as a big loss, the Pistons should be excited. Pistons fans should be excited that they're getting, a quality coach that is going to come in and help a team that was a very poor shooting team. But I think you're right. I think that's sort of the game plan. And they might be going into this offseason then, anticipating having guys like Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, and a guy like Buzelis, who are not really strong shooters. Even a Cody Williams, who I don't think he had a whole lot of volume. I think he did have a good three-point percentage at Colorado, but it wasn't quite the volume that you would expect out of a wing in today's NBA. So that could be the vision. They're planning on having everybody back and tweaking around the margins, which we're gonna have to see this time next week. We are gonna know, and we are gonna be covering the draft in some fashion. We don't quite know yet, but we will have some level of coverage for next Wednesday for the NBA draft.
Yeah, I think the Fred Vinson hire is, well, it's obviously a really good hire. Like you said, a lot of people in NBA circles were lauding the Pistons for that hire, talking about how great of a hire it was. And there were a lot of people, within the Pelicans fan base, the Pelicans community, talking about how much of a loss that was for them. The only thing I'll say is it is interesting that you're hiring an assistant coach and then firing the head coach. So it's like he's staying with whatever this new staff is going to look like. I don't know what will happen with all of the assistants that were on, Monty Williams' staff. I know that they've been present at workouts and whatnot, but that's certainly interesting. And I know Vincent maybe isn't as much of an in-game assistant coach as he is more of a player development coach in terms of, during practice and off-season stuff. So maybe that plays a factor in making that decision to bring in an assistant like that, knowing that you're going to be making a change at the head coaching spot. But certainly a really, really good hire for Detroit. I think that has to be mentioned on the podcast. It's just so many things that you have to talk about. It's like we could have done a whole hour here today on Monty Williams, but it's like the draft is 5 days away, and it's like no one's even talking about it. So, that's something that, on Friday, as the day this podcast comes out, I'm going to be very curious to hear what Trajan Langdon and Tom Gores have to say at the podium on Wednesday, or on Friday. What are they going to say about the draft? What's their approach going to be? I think the vibe that we've gotten from Langdon is that he's interested in this core and keeping this youth movement going. And, that might veer off from what we had initially been told to expect had it going into the offseason, with there likely being a move or two from this young core, with one or two of these guys being dealt. That might not be the case anymore. So I'm very, very interested to hear what Langdon has to say for the first time. Certainly will be interested to hear what the owner Tom Gores has to say about the decision to bring in Langdon, the decision to let go of Monty Williams, and the future of this team. I mean, let's face it, so much has to happen still for this ball club to even sniff relevancy. And it starts on Wednesday night at the NBA draft.
It sure does. And hear the eulogy for Troy Weaver as well. We missed out on that. Interested to see what they say about Weaver, because it was very mutual agreement to part ways and not we fired this dude for just these 55, 60 reasons. So definitely look forward to your assessment of Friday or today on what they have to say at the press conference. Aaron, any other plugs or things that you want to get off here before we wrap up this edition of the podcast?
Yeah, well, I'll have plenty of stuff from the press conference on Friday on X at A Johnson NBA and at Palace of Pistons. That's where you can go follow us to support our work over on X. You can hit us up at Palace of Pistons on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, all those places. Make sure you're going and hitting the subscribe button. All that stuff greatly supports us and helps us. And that's my birthday wish, is for all of us that listen to the show to go and help us out and subscribe and continue to boost our numbers that are seeing a continuous spike. We love to see it. We love the support. And it's a busy off season for the Pistons. It's going to continue to be, with the draft in the coming days, the coaching search that's going to seemingly be going on both before and after the draft. Right after that, it's going to be Summer League and free agency. So much to go during a very, very busy, a very, very important offseason for the Detroit Pistons. Very, very interested to see everything that happens, and we'll have plenty of content covering it along the way, and we want you to stick around with us for all of that coverage.
Yes, your favorite time of the year is Summer League. That is the Aaron Johnson staple.
Love it.
He loves it. He loves it. Real quick before we go, since this is sort of kind of relevant to the Pistons, give a grade on the Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey 1-for-1 swap.
Wow. I mean, A+ for the Thunder. I don't know how they didn't have to give up any picks in that deal. Alex Caruso is like sort of the best version of Josh Giddey. I know Giddey has much more playmaking chops, but Caruso is like the top of the line defender, has some three-point shooting abilities. I mean, what a home run get for them. Like, you're talking about getting rid of pretty much your worst rotation player in the playoffs and replacing him with a veteran defensive ace that can shoot the ball, all effort, all intensity, can guard the opposing team's best player 1-3, maybe 1-4.
Yeah.
Like, absolute home run get for the Thunder. I do not understand that trade for the Bulls. It feels like they should have been able to get a pick alongside Josh Giddey. I mean, we're talking about, the reports of the Bulls not being willing to trade Caruso for anything more or anything less than 3 first-round picks, and then they ended up with no first-round picks and Josh Giddey, who just had a really, really bad playoff performance. So I'm not sure how the Bulls didn't ensure that they got a first-round pick from a team that had $1 million to spend. I don't understand what the Thunder are going to continue to do with all of those. Like, they've got to have roster spots for all of these guys, and the roster is pretty chock full of legitimate NBA players on it already. So cannot believe the Bulls didn't manage to get first there. I actually don't even mind them getting Josh Giddey. I don't think that's a terrible decision.
That's fine.
Allow him to be the lead guard. Allow him to get big minutes as a starter.
Right.
As a true point guard. Wasn't able to do that as much in OKC with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander over there and Jalen Williams. Like, I'm all for giving him that opportunity, but you've got to get more with it. I just don't understand how Detroit misses there.
Aaron, we have breaking news that's relevant to the Detroit Pistons.
All right, the show continues.
The show continues briefly. The Pistons, this is according to ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, the Pistons have permission to interview Dallas assistant Sean Sweeney, who we've already talked about, and Minnesota Timberwolves assistant Micah Nori for the vacant head coaching position. And the Pistons are also planning to interview former Cleveland Cavaliers head coach J.B. Bickerstaff. That was not sourced. That came out of just my brain. But the Pistons are going to go ahead and give it a go with JB, allegedly, according to ESPN. Aaron, what do you think?
Well, look, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised on Nori and Sweeney. I'll say I'm a little caught off guard by Bickerstaff, but he wasn't absolutely terrible in Cleveland, Mike. I know you probably can speak on that more. But Woj also said the Pistons are expected to call for permission on more assistants that they'd like to interview as well. So I'm sure we'll see a more expanded list with some of the names that we already mentioned here previously on the show. The Pistons need to do their due diligence. If they need to talk to 10 coaches, if they need to talk to 15 coaches, fine. Make sure you're getting the right guy. And look, Langdon has a lot of relationships in the NBA. He has a lot of relationships across the league. So he's going to talk to a lot of guys. I'm very, very sure about that. So look, I think these are two assistants that we expected Detroit to talk to, that we expected to be in the mix. They have connections to Dwayne Casey. They have connections to the organization, and they are seemingly coaches that are on the rise, trending towards being NBA head coaches at one point. The Pistons might be that landing spot for them. So I like it. JB Bickerstaff, we'll see. I can't say that's a name that jumps off the board of me as a guy that I'm absolutely, saying Detroit needs to go get. I'm actually curious what you would think on JB, because you have a much closer view on him being a Cavaliers guy.
So it's not that JB was a bad coach necessarily. I think he navigated very difficult waters, the John Beilein slugs thugs fiasco. He navigated the Kevin Porter Jr. fiasco that the Cavaliers had. He navigated the Donovan Mitchell trade, it's not easy to assimilate a star. But he worked with a lot of young players, rookie Darius Garland, worked with Colin Sexton. He's got experience in Houston and Memphis. I think he's a fine option. I said it during the show. I think he's a fine option. He's a guy with playoff experience. He's a guy that has connected to young players in the past. And I think he's a good guy all around. I think with Cleveland, it was less of, he's a bad coach. It's that they just needed a different voice in that locker room. And that's why they moved on from JB. JB was here for a while, pre-pandemic, I think.
So let me put you on the spot. The same way earlier. If Pistons hire JB Bickerstaff, would that be a good hire for Detroit?
Yeah, I think so. I do. I mean, I'm fine with that. I think he's
So if you say it, I'm good with it. Like
I think he's an advanced version of some of those player development type of guys, because he also has playoff experience. He went through the player development era with Isaac Okoro and Garland and with Evan Mobley, and they became a respectable core. I mean, he was getting Coach of the Year recognition when they made the play-in, and the first year they had Donovan Mitchell, and obviously that played a huge part in it. But I think he went through the ringer of trying to navigate a lottery-bound team, connected with a lot of the young guys, and then worked his way all the way up to winning a playoff series, and they just kind of ran out of steam. I mean, there's a scenario in which they don't fire JB and they chalk it up to the fact that they didn't have Jared Allen. They had Donovan Mitchell on one leg, and they had, a Darius Garland who wasn't fully healthy either, and say, that's the reason to keep him. He just kind of ran out of time in Cleveland. I don't think it's a coaching deficiency thing. He just ran out of time and his voice started to fall on deaf ears. But I think that would be a fine hire. And Woj made an interesting point of that they're going to get to interview him first because he's going to have greater access, whatever that means. But yeah, I think he'd be a fine hire.
Okay. Well, I'll be interested to see what other information comes out on who Detroit talks to. I'm sure you're going to see some more names from the guys that we already talked about today.
Yeah.
You know, Quinn, Will Weaver, James Borrego is available, Kenny Atkinson. It's a deep list. There's a lot of candidates out there, despite there only being a few teams that are really in search for a head coach right now. There's still a guy out there for Detroit, despite it being what I would say is pretty late in the game, considering we are heading into the final week of June. So a lot to happen for Detroit here. And glad we got to break that news here on the show, because I know people are going to have some thoughts. I'm curious who everyone else wants the Pistons to hire as the team's head coach. I know there are going to be some very spirited thoughts from a very spirited Detroit Pistons fan base and a very spirited Palace of Pistons commentary section. Let us know what you think. Who do you want the Pistons to hire as a head coach? And are you good with Monty Williams being fired? I know there are some of you out there that wanted Williams to get another shot. You're crazy, but I still want to know why, because sometimes your curiosity kills me. I don't know. It's absolutely bizarre that you believe he should get another year, but tell me why in the comment section.
Yes, tell us why we're wrong when you're actually wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and please go ahead and let us know who you want to be the next head coach of the Detroit Pistons. So this ended up turning into a little bit longer of a show. Me putting you on the spot about Alex Caruso extended us into the breaking news portion. So maybe that's the secret sauce to get like a big move in the middle of a podcast, because I want a reaction with you and Jasper and like hands on the head meme stuff that we can use for social. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Or even like a Brian Windhorst, what does it mean?
Yeah.
Type of deal. Aaron, that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. Do you have anything else you want to close on? I know that you already did your closing thoughts 10 minutes ago.
I'll just say it again. For my birthday, please just hit the subscribe button. Subscribe to palaceofpistons.com. Love and appreciate all the support, everyone.
Don't disappoint Aaron for his birthday. How dare you? Subscribe to us on Substack. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's show, and that's BetOnline. And again, you can use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use BetOnline. For Aaron Johnson, I am Micah Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network, and we will see you all next time.